Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. And my guest today is no other than the legendary David Heinemeier Hanson, the creator of Ruby on Rails, the co-founder of Basecamp and Hey, the best-selling author, winning race car driver, antitrust advocate, podcaster, and so much more. Welcome, David, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. David, let's start with a fun question. What would you say, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much of an optimization junkie are you?
Oh, I gotta be a full 10. I absolutely love to optimize everything that I dive into. Everything I care about, I should say. And that is in itself an optimization, to focus where your energy should go. It can't go all over the place all the time. So narrowing on those key spots that really matter is huge to me. But in programming, for example, I can spend absolute hours just trying to get one piece of code perfect, that there's nothing in there that I think could be one way or the other way, but it's just right. So I take a great amount of pleasure out of optimization. Race car driving is much the same way. You must optimize every 10th of a second, every single corner to make it go around. I get a tremendous joy out of seeing, do you know what? I've done everything I can in this instance to make this perfect.
Yes, I am the same. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But for you, has that always been the same for you? Like, have you always loved optimization, or is it something that runs in your family, or are you how did it come about that you love optimization so much?
That's a good question. I think it comes about when I really just get into a certain domain and I get focused on something. I want to be as good as I possibly can be. And to me, optimization is an extension of skill. It's an extension of competency. It's an extension of having developed an eye that can see all the things that aren't yet perfect. Now, as I mentioned, I think this goes hand in hand with deciding what to optimize on. I think you can become quite OCD in your life if you think every single interaction you have, every single moment of the day, every single activity needs to follow that same regiment of optimization. So, for example, for me, when I was in school, I optimized my sort of outcome of that by choosing some subjects to fail. In the beginning of the school year, I would simply choose, you know what, that subject, I am not going to invest any time in whatsoever. I'm not even going to deliver a baseline performance. I am completely satisfied with the idea that I'm going to fail, because I want that time to optimize in other areas of my life, of my education, of my hobbies, of my interests in computers. And I think that level of awareness that you can't optimize everything all the time, we don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, is key to be able to then focus really deeply on a few number of things that matter intently.
Oh, that's a very interesting approach for sure, especially at such a young age, like when you're at school and you're already deciding, okay, I'm going to fail this subject. So what are you optimizing for in your life and businesses right now? What does success look like at this point in your life?
So it's a bit of a mixed answer, because on the one hand, I have had all the success in terms of financial success or business success that I could ever dream for about 15 years. All my financial aspirations and so on were fulfilled quite early on, because 37 Signals did very well, because Basecamp, our project management tool, took off in the way it did when we launched it early. And some of the optimization is to make sure you keep a good thing going. I think I've met a lot of very powerful, interesting entrepreneurs who are so obsessed with taking things to the next level. I know we'll probably talk about that, but that you sometimes end up staking a really good place that you've arrived at on the bet that you can turn it into something bigger, that it becomes a sense of double or nothing. And at least as it comes to sort of financial success or business success, that's not one of the areas that I found most interesting to keep pushing on. I don't need to go double or nothing on the business that we've built at 37 Signals. That base allows me to go really deep on other things that I care tremendously about. For example, programming is one of those evergreen pursuits that I've been involved in for well plus 20 years. And I keep finding things there that I want to go deeper on, that I want to push further on, piece of technology that comes out that I want to investigate. So again, that meme of choosing where your optimization go is just absolutely key important. And for me, that optimization continues to go into my writing. I've written 4.5 books with Jason Fried. I continue to write a lot on my own personal blog. I just really enjoy that. I enjoy having conversations like this. I enjoy educating people on the lessons that we've learned over the years that we've been in the business. But it doesn't need to come at an expense of maintaining a baseline for the business. So that composition, that big picture, optimizing the big picture is in some sense also figuring out where you don't need to turn the dials any further.
Right. So is it fair to say that you let curiosity take the reins and just follow your curiosity wherever it leads you?
Certainly within technology, certainly within programming. And I think that's actually a fairly good standard to judge most things that I spent my time on in business at the moment. We've arrived at the place where, do you know what? I don't need to do that many things. There are phases of entrepreneurship where you absolutely need to do X, Y, C, and D, and E, and F. But we have a really good, stable setup. So there's rare occasions where I need to step in to do something because it's really crucial to the business. And then the rest of the time, I can exactly spend pursuing my curiosity and just things that that interest me. So that goes to, again, the programming. I'll find some technical niche, or I'll find some ideas for things we can do differently. And going, do you know what? I'm just going to pursue that, not with sort of instrumental approach where I necessarily know up front it's going to do exactly this, just because it is interesting to pursue. And I trust that if I follow the thread of something interesting, I will land in a place that's going to have some value, both to the business, to myself, and so forth. How much value? That's often very speculative. I think a lot of entrepreneurs love to deceive themselves by thinking that they can foresee everything that happens, or they know exactly how big the opportunity is, or blah, blah, blah. Most of us just don't know that much. And the best that we could do is show up with our best and put it to good use on something we're curious about, something we're intrinsically motivated for, and then see what happens.
That's so true. Now, what are you curious about at the moment? So what are some new ideas that are really exciting to you right now?
There's two realms. One is in the technical realm. There has actually been a lot of innovation and progress on the fundamental hardware that we use to run our business. The CPUs and especially the SSD drives of modern computers are amazing, and they're changing some fundamental assumptions about how we build systems. Just for one example, as little as 10 years ago, we were still spinning mostly, as they say, rust. We were using hard drives with spinning metal disks. And they just had some very specific characteristics about how quickly you can find information, how much information you can read in one go. And that, in turn, infiltrated the designs of systems, that you needed to design systems in a certain way so that they were compatible with this mode of hardware. Well, we're no longer spinning rust. We're no longer spinning these plates around. We're using SSD drives that are more like RAM, just way, way faster than those hard drives that went before them. And it really changes how you architect systems. And I find that those sort of moments of progress that sneak up on you, things get a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster. And suddenly there's almost like a step function where things have become fast enough to unlock a new domain or unlock a new approach. And very often what happens is that sneaks up on folks, and they don't even realize, because we've been in this mode where we've been developing software a certain way for these spinning plates. And we just have that intuitively as our design in our heads about how to build systems. Now this thing has crept up, and suddenly the disruption is here, and someone needs to take advantage of that. So I love diving into that. I love diving into what can we question. I've been building information systems for well over 20 years. In that time, there's a half-life of truth. There is things you take for granted that those things are just permanent, and yet they aren't. 5 years passes on, and suddenly the assumptions have changed, and you need to be ready to change with that if you want to take advantage of it. So that's one domain. The other domain is how we distribute software. So I've been selling software as a service, SaaS software, well before that term was even coined. I think the term was coined in 2007 or 8, and we started in 2004. And it's been so successful because the magic of recurring revenue is so attractive to companies, and especially attractive to investors, and occasionally also attractive to consumers, that it's essentially come to dominate the entire software industry when it comes to the professional side of things. Even things like Lightroom or Photoshop, you can hardly, I don't even think you can buy them outright anymore. You can only buy them as a subscription. Do you know what? I think something is lost in that, and I think it is time for a turning here, that there's room for new ways, or perhaps old ways, of starting to distribute software again and selling them in a different way, not selling them on subscription anymore. So that's another one of those new frontiers that I'm really interested in, that we're doing some work in, and hopefully perhaps even next week, by the time this episode airs, we'll have made an announcement about.
Ooh, keeping it interesting. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And I love how you describe that kind of, that the next level might sneak up on you. It's kind of like a phase shift sometimes, right? So you increase temperature by 1 degree, and all of a sudden you have this phase shift.
Exactly.
Now, while I love optimization too, as I said, what I've noticed is that there certainly is a point where too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. And I talk to a lot of people who struggle with really paralyzing perfectionism. So do you sometimes struggle with that too? And how or when do you decide that something is just good enough to release it into the world?
I think that's absolutely key. Perfect is the enemy of good. And if you strive for perfection in every single realm of what you're doing, you will never, ever be done. There's always more to be done, especially when you think about something like scope. How much of the problem domain should we tackle? If you're a perfectionist and you try to tackle all of it at once up front, that is a recipe for disaster. We have a saying at 37 Signals that we would rather build half a product than a half-assed one. So that goes to both sides of it. Both this sense that scope is the one we will negotiate. We'd rather build less if we can build it better. And I think this is one way to counter this sense of perfectionism, this draw to perfectionism, that you focus your perfectionism on a few things. The place where most people fall into the trap is when they try to focus that perfectionism on everything, or just even too many things. There's only room for a handful of things to be perfect. And by perfect, I just mean as good as you can make them. I think that's the other thing. Recognize the boundaries of what you're capable of, what your competence stretches to do. I don't strive for perfectionism that is beyond what I can do. I strive for a perfectionism that I am personally capable of. So if I've chosen that there's a part of this product that I really want to be very good, or part of this program that I really want to be very good, I will use the full extent of my capacity to arrive at perfect within that. I may very well know that, you know what, there might sit somewhere else that's a smarter programmer than me, that's a better business person than me, that could make it even more perfect. So what? What use is it for me to fantasize about what other people perhaps could do in that situation? Don't get stuck on that. Get to the extent of what you're capable of in those few domains, and then keep moving. And as time inevitably gets eaten up by some of those pursuits, you have to just be willing to shrink on the other end. This connects directly to the conversation we started with. Choosing which subjects to fail. There's a wonderful book called Blue Ocean Strategy that details how to set business strategy by just as much deciding where you're not going to compete as where you are going to compete. And in order for you to be perfect or even just better than the competition in a number of areas, in almost all cases, you also have to choose where you're going to be worse. And I think this is something a lot of entrepreneurs have a hard time with. Thinking
Yes.
that they intentionally are going to design their product or their service to be worse than the competition. Well, that's just reality, especially when you go up against incumbents, especially when you're an underdog. You just can't do all of it better than everyone else. That is delusional. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs are delusional, and some delusion is actually not a bad thing to have in your life because it sort of gives you the power to keep going, even if the odds are perhaps not 100% in your favor. But you can still work to optimize those odds. That's the other thing I find with entrepreneurs and perfection. That, do you know what? There's a huge difference about choosing to go with a project that has a 20% chance of success or one that has a 1% chance of success. In business in general, for example, this is one of the reasons we never took venture capital. We were never interested in becoming a unicorn. We didn't want a small chance of a fantastical success. I wanted as good of a chance as I could possibly get for a good success. And that actually goes to the core of that perfect being the enemy of good. If you are only chasing the unicorn level of success in business, especially in tech startups, you're giving up on a much better chance of a good business. Do you know what? We have a good business. In fact, I would say we have a wonderful business. It is less than 80 people. It is not doing billions of dollars a year, but yet it affords us all the freedom we could possibly want. It affords me the luxury of chase all the curiosities that I find along my way. And we have a wonderful time doing that. How is that not a fantastical success? Well, it's not a fantastical success if you only measure it on the bar of billions. I would argue that that's a very poor measure of success in general, and that you have to zoom out and see the bigger picture and optimize for some notion of perfection of keeping all those individual components balanced against each other.
I love that. And I totally agree. It's not about creating a product that doesn't have any flaws or that couldn't be better or that's better than all the competition. It's really about creating something that you're proud of, and that's the result of the best work that you can do with what you have right now.
Exactly. It's about embracing those constraints. That's another term we throw around a lot. Then, especially if you are an entrepreneur who's starting a new business, you're going to have an infinitude of constraints, but those are good. You don't have enough people, you don't have enough time, and you don't have enough money. Those are the kinds of constraints that create new innovative products that couldn't be created by the likes of Microsoft or Google or Amazon or whatever, because they would never throw so little at the problem. This is the other thing. If you just need a little, you can't pursue it with the biggest guns in the industry. You simply can't arrive at those solutions. Google has to look at a potential business idea and go, do you know what? Unless this is worth, I forget what their cutoff is, $500 million a year, unless we can see the path to that, it's just not worth doing. Well, first of all, there's a fair number of ideas that eventually become worth $500 million a year that you just can't tell in the moment. And then there's a bunch of other ideas that are wonderful, great ideas that the world deserves to have, that are $20 million a year ideas, that are $100 million a year ideas, that are perhaps to a tiny team a $2 million a year idea. And I would hate if we were deprived of those ideas just because people keep thinking, do you know what? The only bar of success, the only thing worth chasing is something that is enormous.
Yes, so true. Now, to stay with the optimization topic just a little bit longer, the one thing that we all need in order to optimize anything is feedback, right? So we can either have positive or we can have negative feedback, which can all give us the necessary information. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of people struggle with receiving negative feedback. How do you personally think about this, and how do you handle negative feedback?
Well, I think one of the ways I've been lucky is I've been born with simply a high degree of confidence in my own ability and opinions. Other people would summarize that as simply being arrogant. And if you look up what arrogance is, it is to have a higher self-assessment that others would grant you. And I think actually entrepreneurs need some degree of arrogance. They need to see something in themselves, in their idea, that others are not yet capable of seeing. Because unless you have that confidence to keep pushing when others aren't convinced, you're never going to get any interesting idea out there. If that interesting idea that you're working on was so obvious, so unqualified and easy to analyze and arrive at a verdict of good, someone else would have done it. So much of entrepreneurship relies on the fact that the idea at first glance perhaps looks small or silly or even stupid. And to face the world with an idea that perhaps even looks outright stupid, you actually need some degree of arrogance. You need to believe that you can take this idea that others are looking at and thinking of as stupid right now and turn it into something in perhaps a few years that the same people, the very same people, will flip on and go, that's brilliant, right? And I think that degree of self-confidence and pushing forward is quite important. I think you can develop it. Not everyone perhaps is born with it in the same way that I perhaps for this specific area of human life was happy to be born with and was fortunate to be born with. It has its own drawbacks and consequences in other realms. But I think you can cultivate it and at least strive to cultivate it. That, you know what, internalizing the belief that this is necessary. For me to be a good entrepreneur, for me to push an idea that not everyone can see as well as I can see forward, I need to be this person. I need to become this person. And I think this is another thing that's really key and something that I embraced very early on was, do you know what? When I started just as being an entrepreneur, I wasn't a finished person. I was a work in progress. I was a project in much the same way as the things that I was working on. And I could improve. I could become a better person, not just in terms of my technical skills, but also in terms of my outlook, in terms of my reactions. And there's a ton of ways that you can upgrade those things. You can, of course, become a better technical person by just honing your craft and following the masters of your craft. But you can also upgrade your operating system for thinking and for analyzing problems and so forth. This is one of the reasons I always plug Stoicism when it comes to this topic, because that has been one of those finely honed operating systems of thinking that I've adopted and found a ton of use and really resonated with the way I was already thinking about things. It just crystallized them and made them clearer. And I think at least being intentional about that, you know what? This is part of the journey. This is part of it. You know, when I start, I'm going to be one person. And if I'm going to be good at this, if I'm going to be better at this, if I'm going to optimize this, I need to become somewhat of a different person. Not in all regards. It's not that you have to lose yourself entirely. But this idea that becoming someone else is actually a positive vision of yourself, that no person is born perfect. Every one of us have room for optimization, room for improvement. And as long as you take that in a good faith way, where you're not constantly beating yourself up, oh, why am I not better? And why am I not perfect now? And so on. That is completely, in my opinion, useless, if not downright counterproductive. But if I just go like, you know what? I show up and I'm pretty good, but I could be better. And if I spend time adopting better ways of thinking, I can see the results of that. I can see that I'm calmer, that I have a better strategic overview, that I'm better at picking which things to dive into with my perfectionism, and I get better results from that. I think it's just as important as focusing on the product itself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this growth mindset is so important because, as you said, we're all work in progress and we have to embrace that. Now,
Yes.
what about situations where you are the one who has to give feedback? Do you pay attention to whether you frame it in a positive or a negative way? And what have you learned about communicating and giving feedback in a way that motivates people rather than frustrates them?
Oh yeah, that's a good topic, because this is actually one of the areas where I have a lot of work still to do, where I recognize my own failings. And one of the failings is I am not a patient teacher. I can, on occasion, be a passable teacher when I know something that I need to impart on someone else who gets it right away, which is such an unfair standard, which is why I would not commit myself to a life of one-on-one teaching. I prefer my teaching to be broader, to be more anonymous in some sense, that I am sharing whatever I learn in the format and with the wisdom that I took away from it, and then I write it down in a way that someone can learn on their own time and at their own pace. When I have to do the one-on-one teaching, it is a bit of a coin flip as to whether that goes well. I am absolutely recognizing the fact that I don't have the patience to methodically, patiently walk through something with someone who needs to get it or needs to have it told a few different ways, or a different way that even I pursued it, right? Like, the thing with learning is we pick up different skills in different ways, or the same skills in different ways. And just the way that I picked it up might not be the way that's good for the person I'm trying to teach something here. So the way that I typically engage is at a relatively sort of objective level. I'm just trying to point out, hey, here's how I see things, and here's how it goes. I have that dialogue running in my head about, do you know what, is that what this person actually would want? Is this motivating? How can I phrase it? But I'm not that good at translating that dialogue into what the best teachers can do. The teaching in itself is a skill, and it's a skill that I haven't chosen to really focus that deeply on. It's certainly one I've chosen not to perfect. And broadly speaking, it's better if, at least if you take a domain that I'm not alone in knowing, I'm not alone in being able to impart, that someone else should do that. I think that's part of perfection too, is to recognize, you know what, I can grow, I can become better, but there's also a sense of deciding where you can become better. And some people have this sense, oh, let me find out where my strengths and weaknesses are, and then I'll work on my weaknesses. There's a whole body of leaders who are saying, basically, you know what, that's very difficult work, and in some cases it's even impossible work. That you are better off in many cases doubling down on your strengths, recognizing your weaknesses, and then complementing your team or your sphere with others who, instead of the weaknesses you have, they have other weaknesses, and then they have some strengths that complement your weaknesses. I think this is one of the reasons, for example, that Jason Fried, my business partner at 37 Signals, and I have worked together so well for 22 years, is because we do complement each other. We're not just carbon clones of each other. There's a lot of overlap, but then there's also parts of the Venn diagram where we have our own slices, we have our own half moons that bring something that the other doesn't have to the table. And I think with teaching, that is one of those domains where I just go like, you know what? If this is, for example, teaching someone Ruby, the programming language that I use, I know for a fact that there's a lot of wonderful, excellent teachers out there. I would be a bad teacher of Ruby because there's so many other people who could do it, and they could undoubtedly do it better than me. So my optimization, my perfection is to take 2 steps and like, all right, someone else should do that.
That's totally fine. You are allowed to outsource stuff. You don't have to do everything yourself, right?
Exactly.
Now, a lot of people think that they are either, too young, too old, too dumb, too whatever, to do the things that they would really like to do. And I always like to challenge that thinking, because most of the time it's really just excuses and trying to justify not taking any risks. Now, as a counterexample, I'd love for you to tell the story of how you got into racing cars. So how old were you when you learned how to drive, and how long did it take you to get to the top, and what have you learned on this journey?
Yes, I actually got started quite late in life with several of the interesting pursuits that I've followed. Not just race car driving, but also programming. I didn't really learn programming until I was 20 years old, which is quite late for someone who then ended up developing the career that I did in programming. But it's even more accentuated when it comes to racing. I did not get my driver's license until I was 25 years old. And I did not sit in a racing car until I was 27 years old. And that sort of sense of I'm showing up, and there are other people here who are my age, who've literally been racing for 20 years at that point. It's very common that the best racers in the world, they start go-karting by the time they're 5 or 6 years old. That I could become, if not directly competitive, at least in the same realm, at least have an opportunity to compete and occasionally beat these people who've literally been doing it 20 more years than me, is a testament to the fact that you can learn a great many things quite late in life. I don't think you can learn it impossibly late. I think race car driving is one of those physical activities that if you try to pick it up at 60, do you know what? You're never going to be able to be in that same realm. But picking it up at 25, 27 really for racing was possible. And I set myself the goal after I got into a race car and became addicted to it basically on the first day. I got to experience a race car a real race car with slick tires, single-seater, the whole thing. And after I got out of that car, it just felt like my mind had been completely blown, as though I've taken a tablet of LSD or something. And I just went, I want more of this. I want to get back into this universe. I want to get back into this space where everything else disappears. And perhaps it was because I'd recognized that state, the flow state, this state where you're completely engrossed in an activity and you lose track of time and place. When you're in a race car, at least when I sat in a race car, all my attention was focused on the next corner. In part because it's a danger perhaps involved that, do you know what? If you get this horribly wrong, it will actually hurt, if not worse. So that really helped stimulate the mind, I think, to getting into that singular tunnel vision where you can pursue something. But I recognized that was the same thing from the best moments of programming, for example, for the best moments of writing. They would have that same quality that I would thinking about anything else. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, what are we going to make for dinner tonight, or what meeting do I have next week? It was just about being present in the moment for the next direct activity, writing the next word, programming the next expression, race car driving the next corner. So I really got into that, and I spent the next at least 2 years just honing that at a local track, not really doing any competition, just getting more and more familiar with the craft of race car driving. And then 2 years later, I did my first competition and got a taste for that and set the highest goal I essentially could. What would be my kind of blowout accomplishment is race car driving. For me, that was racing at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So that happened in 2012. That's 5 years after I first sat in a racing car. I was on the grid at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And I won that race 2 years after that in 2014. Wow. And sort of that progression of deciding, do you know what? I am going somewhere with this. I'm enjoying myself. And that's, for some people, that's enough, right? They're like, hey, I'm having fun. It's enough to have fun. Do you want I have more fun when I think I'm also going for something. So I combine that aspect of having fun in a race car with also picking some immediate, slightly out of reach goals for me, or milestones rather, for progression. And then I could know, do you know what? I don't need to spend another 2 years at this level in this series. I have now spent a third of a season. I'm good enough. Maybe I'm not going to clean up and win the whole thing, but you know what? I'm competitive enough. I need to go to a bigger pond. I need to be a smaller fish in a bigger pond for me to progress faster. And I think one of the things that hold people back, both in race car driving and in other sports and in other hobbies and even in business, is becoming too comfortable being a big fish in a small pond. Being like, oh, I am really very respected in this little niche circle, and that feels very comfortable. I don't want to give that up. I've always been incredibly eager to give that up. I am highly suspicious whenever I end up in a pond where it feels like I'm amongst the bigger fish, because I'm going to stop learning. Once you are the biggest fish in the pond, like, the game is over to some extent. And now it becomes a game of maintaining what you have in a sort of adversarial way, which I never enjoy. I want to be the worst in the room. I want to be the dumbest in the room. I want to be the slowest driver on the team. Because as long as all those things are true, I know, do you know what? Here's someone I can learn from. Here's someone I can progress with. And that, to me, is a better reward than almost anything else. You know what? I can look back and see last year, I was worse. I learned something this year. Now, race car driving is an interesting one because I've actually reached the point now where I'm more or less as big of a fish as I'm going to get. Like, I'm not going to get that much better. I am 43. And that is the time where on some of these things that rely on certain physical capacities and so on, you start cresting, which is also fine. I think that's the other part of it, accepting there are different phases of life, as there are different phases of business. 37 Signals, for example, is not a startup anymore. We shouldn't act as though we are a startup. We shouldn't act as though we're 5 minutes from running out of money. We can do different things now. We can still be an underdog. We can still take on worthy fights. We can still have principles. We can still have all of that energy, but it has to channel itself in ways that are proportionate to our station and time in life. And I feel the same thing about race car driving. Do you know what? I shouldn't think, it's a catastrophe if I'm going to be constantly getting better and better and better. I kind of peaked out there. Now I need to find a different pond, a different shape to take, so that I once again can be the small fish in a big pond.
Oh, that's such an interesting and inspiring story. And I love what you said about this flow state, because I think this is something that everyone, it's different and unique for everyone, when we all have to find the activities that stimulate the right neurochemical cocktail to get us into those states. So for me, it's running. So, but it's different for everyone. And for me personally, racing car sounds like a very dangerous thing to do. So again, on a scale from 1 to 10, how risk-seeking would you say you are?
It's funny you mention that, because I'm pretty sure if you do the long run analysis of what's more likely to lead to injury, running is way higher up than race car driving. From being hit by a car when you're out running to pulling whatever, a tendon or something else. I have, knock on wood, really only ever had maybe 1.5 bad incidents in racing. Once I kind of screwed up my hand a little bit, but that's it. Now, racing can be dangerous. People die racing. They absolutely also die running. So some of it is to have a sense of analysis of the actual risks. I'm actually quite risk averse. The only time I seem like a risk seeker, at least in my optics, is when other people haven't done the full analysis on whether this is actually risky or not. Entrepreneurship is a great example. There's a complete mythology that's built up that entrepreneurs are these highly risk-seeking individuals who will gamble everything on the one great idea. They will max out their credit cards. They will take a second mortgage. They will do all these things to make it work. I was never that person. Never, ever. 37 Signals got into software development in the most risk-averse way possible. We started developing Basecamp as a third or fourth client next to a bunch of other clients who were paying the bills sufficiently such that even if we totally failed with Basecamp and never made $1 from it, it would have been fine. In fact, it would have been better than fine. We would have had a good time building a cool system where we would have learned a lot and we would have lost nothing. So that approach to risk-taking, of analyzing the risk, perhaps from a slightly different angle than is what is typically seen, I think that is the hallmark actually of spotting an opportunity. Certainly when it comes to business. When it comes to race car driving, some of it is perhaps also just the delusion. As we talked about, you need a little bit of delusion to be a race car driver. You need to be a little delusional that the really bad accident is not going to happen to you. But still, I think when you look objectively upon it, if you were a racing car driver in the 1960s and you were racing Formula One, you had, I believe, an 18% chance of not surviving the season. Now, that is some serious risk. That is a type of risk I would never, ever indulge in. That is way, way too high for me. But if you look at it today, I really like motorcycles. I think motorcycles are incredibly cool. I think some of the most awesome, manliest thing you can do is race the Isle of Man TT, which is this insane race that goes through towns and whatever, where 3 people die every year that race is held. It is almost like a throwback to the Formula One of the 1960s. Never, ever in a million years will you find me on a motorcycle. I've made the analysis. You know what? That is just too risky. I think it's super cool. I have tremendous respect for the people who stake that much on it. But I've seen the statistics. Driving in traffic on a motorcycle is literally 200 times more risky than driving a car. That's too high. Driving the Isle of Man TT, which I adore watching and have just tremendous boyhood-like affection for the heroes on those bikes, way too freaking risky. If 3 people were dying every year at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, no way you would find me on that grid.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So how do you assess which risks are worth taking and which are not? Can you walk us through your decision-making framework?
So when it comes to business, I like to look at it in a quite risk-averse way where we like to take risks. I think, by the way, risk is such a malleable word. It can mean almost anything. But risk in business often means trying something new you're not guaranteed success of. You're going to invest material resources, time, money, opportunity into this endeavor, and that's going to have some risk, because if it didn't have some risk, again, as we talked about, it would have been obvious and someone else would have done it. In fact, the opportunity is there because it is risky. So first of all, you need to recognize that and thank the risk for keeping the opportunity alive. Otherwise, if it was zero risk, the opportunity would be dead. But then I like to think, are we risking some time? Are we risking some sort of opportunity here? Or are we risking the business? I don't want to risk the business. There are very few things. In fact, nothing has come along yet. Well, actually, not nothing. Well, risking the business is perhaps an overstatement. We've maybe 3 times in the history of the company ever really risked something to the level where you go like, you know what? There's a possibility here that this can go so poorly that it is going to imperil the business. The vast, vast majority of the time, we're not risking the business. I don't have that obsessive gambler in me that, as we talked about, it's got to be double or nothing. I don't get an acceleration out of double or nothing. I think I'm quite normal in that regard, that we are far more risk adverse, or we take loss, what is it called? Loss aversion, that we see loss as basically twice as painful as gain is. So we would rather, we would hate losing $50 more than we would cherish winning 100. And I think that is absolutely true. And I think it's even more true once you've crossed what to me is the step function of wealth and financial success, which is that you have enough that you no longer need to worry about rent or groceries or dinner or even the hobbies that you enjoy, maybe not race car driving, but sort of more mundane things, that is established. Very, very few things. In fact, I can't come up with any business opportunity I would ever want to risk my baseline for. Because the baseline is, in many ways, the purpose of at least the financial inquiry here into this through entrepreneurship. That you do it because you want to reach that level, because that level affords you freedom. And that, to me, is one of those things. You know, I don't want to stake my freedom. This is one of the reasons why we always turn down venture capital. Venture capital has that character of double of nothing, that someone could come along. Yeah, you know what? Here's a check for $100 million or $200 million. Blow it out. Make 37 signals as big as it possibly could be. Hire thousands of people so that you can seize the possibility of an enormous opportunity. And I just thought, you know what? That's not something I want to stake the rest for. I don't want to stake the baseline for that. I want to stake my freedom for that. I might very well end up in a situation, as countless entrepreneurs have, where they no longer control their destiny. They no longer control their company. They no longer control the direction. They're not even in agreement with where they're going, but they have to keep on going because they've signed up with these people who've given them a lot of money. I'm completely allergic to that. I would much rather have less, but then be completely in control of it.
Yes, totally agree. Now, I heard you say in another interview, and I'm paraphrasing here, that expectations, not outcomes, determine how you feel in any given situation. And again, that's something I totally agree with. And in my work as a coach, I often do something that I call expectation setting before I run a workshop or a meeting. So just to make sure that everyone is on the same page and everyone knows what to expect. And I find this super helpful to get everyone aligned and improve the experience for all the participants. Is that something that you do with your team as well?
Do you know what? It's mostly a technique I've used for myself, and I think we could probably be better at using that internally. But occasionally we do use it internally too. I remember, for example, when we launched Hey, our new email service, hey.com, we had spent 2 years developing it, and we had no idea how the market was going to receive that. This was a completely new domain for us. We were going up against perhaps the worst possible competitor, a huge behemoth, Google, who'd been developing a product for 15 years, Gmail, that was used by 1.5 billion people and was free. That is a very stiff competition. Here we come. We've been developing a system. We're a much smaller company, and we charge money for an email system. That just sounds counterintuitive in this day and age. So we knew that the odds of success were very uncertain. We've done other things in the past that's an extension of something we already done, where we kind of know, do you know what, there's a great demand for this. When we add some features to Basecamp or whatever, that we just got a bunch of feedback. No one was telling us, hey, could you make another Gmail? Right? And this is, I think, the kernel of entrepreneurship, where the risk is part of quantifying the opportunity. There was such risk there because no one was asking for it. It was quite audacious to go out and think you could create not just a new email client, but a new email platform, an alternative to Gmail, not like a thing that goes on top of Gmail. Anyway, when we launched that, I basically set out, do you know what? There's 3 broad buckets here of outcomes. Either this thing launches and it's a complete dead fish in the market. No one wants to buy it. Everyone is happy with Gmail. They don't want to switch. They don't want to pay for email. The worst that could have happened was we just spent 2 years developing the best possible email system that we will use ourselves until the end of time. That's a pretty good outcome. I spend a tremendous amount of time in Gmail in email every day in Hey now, because that is the second most important tool of communication that I have after Basecamp. We use Basecamp for all our internal communication. But as soon as I talk to anyone else, how did we set up this podcast? We did it over email. Email is the common form of communication for everyone, in the same way that the telephone used to be. You find someone's cell phone number, you call them up. Now you find someone's email and you send them an email before you do anything else. So that could be one outcome, that we just build a great tool for ourselves. And not only would we get the tool for ourselves, we would also have gotten all the learning that there is. We could see it as what it's called, a kata or something in karate, a practice. We're figuring out the technologies we want to use in the future for Basecamp. We're getting better. We're honing our craft in ways you can only really do with greenfield development. This is one of the perhaps sometimes pitfalls of getting success. You're sort of stuck in a local optima of, these are the best ideas I had 15 years ago. Well, here was an opportunity where we could use the best ideas that we had today. So that was the sort of low case, if you will. And the expectation setting was about making sure that even the low case, even the worst case outcome, was not just acceptable, but one we've already primed ourselves to be happy about. To me, so much of expectation setting is ensuring, or working on, I should rather say, that all possible outcomes are acceptable. Right. That to me is the absolute entrance to dissatisfaction, is once you start slicing down the outcomes possible in life and say, like, do you know what? This range, I couldn't bear it. This range, I'd be just terribly miserable. What other nonsense? I think this is one of the key notions I picked up from Stoicism, is to accept all of it. Amor fati is the saying of love your faith. That, you know what? Love the terrible things that happen. Not because you wanted the terrible thing to happen, because terrible things happen in life. We're not going to get out of this alive. That goes for all of us. We're all going to go through hardships. We should not see it as some unique special burden that we're getting hit by it. We should try to work on ourselves. Quay, the conversation we just had about improving yourself, working on yourself and our own capacity to withstand adversity. And in fact, then if we have done some of that work, be happy when some of the adversity shows up. Be happy that here's an opportunity to show ourselves that we actually are better, that we are more resilient. And in fact, that's also, of course, the best way to grow resilience is to face adversity and overcome it. So this idea that we should chase paradise and we should try to limit the range of human situations we find ourselves in, I don't actually subscribe to it. In the moment, of course, we're all going to be overwhelmed by, like, oh, this is really hard. This is really painful. This is really disappointing. Yes, true. But these are just cloud feelings, and they'll drift. The wind will carry them away, and you'll be so angry, and the cloud will be so dark. And if you just sit there and wait and let the cloud pass, do you know what? It will have gone. Unless you let it consume you, which, who does that benefit? To what effect? Right? So I think this notion of just working on your own expectations for outcomes in life. And this is where I inevitably get the criticism. Yeah, easy for you to say. It turned out pretty well. Yeah, it did. But you know what? I also know a ton of people who arrived at my station in success and were miserable because there wasn't more. There was a bigger yacht. There was helicopters. There were private jets. I'm just listing all the things that I don't have access to, private islands, all these other things. And they were constantly measuring themselves against someone else. Yeah, that is the worst kind of expectation setting. That, you know what, if I don't reach this mythical place, I'm going to be unhappy. Because do you know what happens? And this is scientifically proven time and time again. You reach that place and boom, 5 minutes, you're unhappy again. The hedonic treadmill is the automatic function that runs for everyone unless you specifically work to counter it. There's a wonderful study on wealth. What does someone need to have to feel at peace? And they did this study, and they asked someone who had $500,000, what do you need to really feel secure? And they'd be like, I need $1 million. Okay. So they asked the person with $1 million, what do you really need? They needed $2 million. They asked someone with $5 million, I need $10 million, right? There was literally just this, I need twice as much as what I currently have. That was the standard deviation, if you will, from happiness that people expressed when they were just asked off the cuff. And I thought, do you know what? That is deeply tragic. What you sit with right now, certainly almost positively for all the listeners that you have, is winning the human lottery. Absolutely. If you look over the long span of human existence, even in our world, out of the 7 billion people in the world right now, chances are you've won the lottery, that you have massively been fortunate in your allotment in life. And instead of sort of embracing that and being happy with that, again, doesn't mean we can't reach. We should constantly try to reach. We can't just be happy in paradise. That's the biggest fallacy of all. That paradise is this place where we will just be internally content that never happens. But that there is a baseline where you go like, you know what? Things are pretty good. They could be better. But if they don't become better, I'm still going to be in a place where I'm happy because I've set those expectations.
Yeah, it's so important. Just the framing, how you look at things, the mindset.
It's everything. It is everything. And I think this is where Stoicism really gives you an appreciation for, it's not what happens to me, it's how I feel about what happens to me. That's what governs whether I am happy or unhappy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you look at how you communicate or how you interact with other people, because sometimes it's easy to do this on your own when you have done the work, but still, if you have to work in a team environment and you have to coordinate people and everyone is slightly different and so on, what have you learned about motivation, company culture, and creating the right incentive structure for building like really high performance teams?
Great question. And I will point to another book here. Daniel Pink's Drive 2.0, I think it's called, is wonderful. And it's mainly wonderful for me because I remember sort of the 3 main drivers that he identifies for motivation. And they are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. If you can nail those 3 with your employees, if you can give room for those 3, if you can define those 3s, I think you are 90% of the way to creating a space where people will be happy. And if you start with the first one, mastery, that goes directly to that discussion we had about perfection. That mastery is about keeping at it until you've reached the limits of your capacity and abilities. This is how you get better, by using all of the capacity that you have, and then you will usually grow a little bit. And if you keep using all of it and all of it and all of it, you'll grow a little bit more. Most people will recognize this if they work out. Like you'll bench press or you'll do lunges and you can do 20 at 15 kilos lunges, let's just say that, right? And you do that for a couple of weeks and suddenly you can do 25. Or you can carry 20 kilos and you're like, what is this magic? Well, the magic is you use the full amount of your capacity as a human with your muscles, and they broke a little and then they grew back better. I believe the same is absolutely true with almost any type of intellectual skill that you can happen. That the myelin that's getting wrapped between your neurons can get wrapped better and stronger, so that you literally upgrade the computer that you have in your head. But to upgrade your computer, you have to push it to the limits of its capacity. So that to me is mastery, is continuing to encourage that, to set that as the standard. No. In general, in the big picture, we will ship good enough. But you know what? This narrow little thing here, we're going to make that freaking perfect. And we're not going to just make it perfect because customers would necessarily appreciate it. We're going to make it perfect because we would appreciate it. I have found that very few things inspire intelligent, diligent, capable people like making good stuff, making something that you're uniquely and intensely proud of. Sometimes you can put in a passable performance and you can go like, that's okay because it's not really the important thing. But if all you do is put in passable performance that never stretches you, I think that's an absolute direct ticket to misery when it comes to work. And I think this is one of the reasons a lot of people are miserable at work, that there are so many companies that they're just looking for a passable performance in all areas at the same time. Can't have that. We must have points of mastery where we're all pushing towards the very best that we could possibly do. Then there's autonomy. And autonomy is, I mean, it's almost in the word, right? You have to be left to your own devices to figure out the path, to be able to do things without being micromanaged, to have enough leeway to exercise that mastery, to find that mastery. We get a lot of that, I think, from remote work. We've been a remote work company for 20 years. I found that my own career didn't take off until remote work. And a lot of it was because of that autonomy, that I needed to sit in my own room with the door that locked for long stretches of uninterrupted time before I could find these rich veins of creativity. And then finally, there's purpose. Are what we're doing mattering? Does it matter in a way that it helps someone that we'd like to help? So at 37 Signals, we make software for small and mid-sized businesses. We make software for the underdogs. When I hear the stories, when our team hear the stories back from the underdogs that we helped, oh, Basecamp really helped me make sure I didn't lose track of these things, that nothing fell through the cracks, and it helped us get better against the larger competitors. That is purpose. You see that you put something into the world, it really helped someone you wanted to help, and they were grateful for it. Oh man, that is just like a boost of motivation and adrenaline. Yeah. So those three things are the things that I try to constantly, well, not constantly, but keep in mind when I think about motivation for employees at 37 Signals.
Oh, those are great tips. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, something that I wanted to dig a little deeper in is that I see so many ambitious entrepreneurs who struggle with the toxic hustle culture. And of course, we need to stretch, and we need, in order to grow, we need to stretch, have those stretch goals and go after them. But as someone who has suffered from burnout, it's always important to me to highlight that working 24/7 is not a great work ethic. It's an unsustainable and dangerous malpractice. Because if you have to work 24/7 to put out fires in your business, then your business foundation and systems are in need of a serious upgrade, right? And I know that you're married, you have kids, you write books, you go on podcasts, you race cars, you do all those amazing things while also building and running several businesses. So I want to know your secrets. I'd love to hear what you're doing on a daily basis to make sure you stay happy, healthy, and productive.
The first thing I do is embrace constraints. Very early on in the time that Jason and I were working together, we came to the understanding that 40 hours is enough and 8 hours a day is plenty. In fact, when we first got started on Basecamp, I was working 10 hours a week, not 10 hours a day, 10 hours a week to build that system. And that system is the foundation of our success today. So if we were able to build the most successful business that we built together in 10 hours a week, 40 hours should be an absolute luxury. And that's exactly what I found. I found that illustration of going from 10 hours, the amount of value I was able to create in 10 hours was not 4x'd when I went to 40. Not even close. It wasn't even doubled. If I get 50% more value out of the next 30 hours that I get out of the first 10, that's probably about right. So that explains that this is a power law, that the things you spend your time on a weekly basis, the vast majority of them just do not matter that much. And that only becomes even more true if you venture beyond the 40 hours a week. In the US in particular, people are so enthralled with bragging about working 60 hours or 80 hours a week. And I always look at that and like, do you know what? That's just a poor optimization. It's a really bad optimization of your time to throw all of those hours into one pursuit when you know there's a power law of impact, that you can't have the same amount of impact in the 60th or 80th hour as you would in the 5th or the 10th. So once that was established, and do you know what's funny is that it wasn't even that much of a explicit discussion. Jason and I both just arrived at the same point. And I think part of it was that we had both observed enough people chasing the other path, chasing the 60, 80, 100, or even 120 in the most ludicrous cases hours a week, and thought, these people aren't doing that well. That doesn't look great. I mean, both from an inside watching someone in companies I worked at where someone more senior than me were putting in that and just going, I don't think they're getting back what they're putting in. That seems like a bad trade. So we embraced those constraints early on and said, this is what we're going to do, because we also had no one else to tell us otherwise. We didn't have any investors that were constantly pushing us on, oh, what's your growth rate for the next quarter? Are you going to hit your numbers? No, we had the freedom of pursuing what we wanted to pursue. We wanted to grow it. We wanted to reach. We wanted to be ambitious, but we could do all of those things within that constraint. And I find it actually helps focus you. When you know you can't just keep adding more and more and more hours onto it, you got to make those hours count. And that became the drive for both Jason and I, making the hours count. A huge part of that is, as we talked about, remote work, giving people the autonomy of their schedule. Instead of treating their schedule like a game of Tetris that you got to fill with all these colored blocks, and a good day is one that has a lot of different colors and a lot of different blocks on, we took exactly the opposite position. A good day is one that's completely clear. And when I say clear, most people think, oh, it's full of free time. What are you talking about? No, this is the work. This is why I'm here. I'm here to pursue the mastery, chasing whatever we're trying to accomplish in that green or in that gray space. And in that gray space, that's where the work happens. In fact, once the Tetris game starts leveling up, that's when, at least in my optics, none of the core work that pushes things forward happens. That doesn't mean you can't have a good meeting, that doesn't unlock an important insight or can't do something else. Absolutely true. But that's the sprinkles. The meat and potatoes is the work, is the clean, open space in your calendar, is the long stretches of uninterrupted time, is the 3, 4, 5 hours where you're just engrossed in one problem. You're not getting interrupted because you're sitting in one of those dreadful open offices. You're not getting interrupted because you constantly have meetings like 45 minutes apart. You've set up your time and your schedule in such a way that it feels like there's enough. And this is the funny thing, when people list up, oh, you do this and you do this and you also do this. I'm like, that's not how it feels. Like, I don't end the week, or occasionally I do, but mostly I don't end the week thinking, wow, I was just so busy. I was constantly busy and I had all this stuff and I didn't get a moment to breathe. And oh, if only there were more than 24 hours in the day, which is one of those bullshit things that people love repeating. I'd be better at accomplishment. What are you talking about? Like, this comes perhaps part back to having some of that self-confidence. You know what? I have confidence that if you just give me long stretches of uninterrupted time, I'll come up with something good. I don't need even 40 hours. That's the truth too. When we say 8 hours is plenty, that 8 hours includes a ton of slack, because virtually no creative individual that I've ever known was able to put in truly 8 hours of dedicated work week after week, month after month. That just doesn't work. We have these sprints where that can happen, and then we have some lulls, and a lot of days are sort of half and half. If on any given day I get 4 hours of really dedicated problem-solving creative time out of it, that is usually a wonderful day. So there's this sense of disconnecting impactfulness from busyness that I'm really into, that a lot of people end up Friday afternoon thinking, oh, I was so busy. And if you ask them what they got done, they were like, well, I had this meeting and we talked about this thing and we did this plan for this other thing. And you're like, yeah, but what did you do? I think this is the crux of a lot of discontent of modern life in general, that it's so intangible. But it can become more practical and it can become more physical if you work in domains like programming, like design, like marketing, like writing, like a ton of different things where you can go, or teaching, education, where you're like, all right, here's a body of work that I accomplished. Then that Friday afternoon can actually feel like something happened, like that the week mattered. I think as, again, this notion of the bullshit job, which was a concept that David Graeber wrote up in a seminal article. He turned it into a book, all on the basis of a poll done with workers in the UK, showing something like 35% of people working in the UK thought their job was bullshit. And they thought it in the sense that it wouldn't matter to humanity whether the work that they were doing got done or not. That is some existential dread that I would not wish upon my worst enemy. This idea that I go to work 40 hours a week and I kind of think it's bullshit. That, like, if I wasn't here, nothing would really change. No material value would evaporate. So I try at least to look at my own contribution. It's not every week. There are weeks I think, oh, that was a bullshit week. Sometimes there's 2 weeks where I think it's a bullshit week. But if I get up to like 3 weeks in a row, oh, that was 3 weeks of bullshit, I know something has to change. And I usually either take a break because there's something like I just need to hit a reset button, or I do a thorough inventory of why is it I'm blocked?
why is it that I keep turning out these bullshit weeks? It's usually because there's something that's difficult, or maybe there's some conflict or whatever I haven't unpacked or haven't unresolved. But then the work needs to be there. I can't just keep in this bullshit loop, because if you do that, those weeks turn into months, and those months turn into years. And this is how you end up on the last day thinking, damn, I missed it.
Yes, so true and so important. David, this has been a super interesting and super helpful conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Well, I'd say if you like any of these ideas, I put out a lot of them, both on podcasts like this, on our own podcast, the REWORK podcast, in my own writing. And you can find links to all of it on dhh.dk. And follow me wherever you get your stuff.
Perfect. David, again, thank you so much for sharing your tips and your wisdom with us today. It's been both an honor and a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care and talk soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That's a fantastic, easy, and zero-cost way to help the show grow. Just use the link in the show notes and make my day. Want more? For quick, actionable tips and insights to guided meditations and a side of biohacking, join my inner circle and get access to exclusive subscriber-only content. Again, just use the link in the show notes to join the tribe. Thank you for your support, and see you on the other side. Take care and talk soon. Bye.